I just have to say, echoing what Jim had said earlier, how happy I am that we are doing the Facebook Live, our very first foray into live streaming. And it is supremely coincidental that a year ago, when I was prepping out sermons for this year, I had pegged this Sunday to be a Sunday where we celebrate technology. Ooh. I never want to put anything past the Holy Spirit. Can't do that anyway. But some of you in Facebook Live land might be viewing us on this marvel of technology called an iPad. This iPad is known for having a picture of my guinea pig on it. Lucy, our guinea pig. And the people went, ah. But look at what happens to Lucy if I do this. Isn't Lucy amazing? How does she do this? And has the pastor lost his mind? Well, have you ever really considered how things we take for granted really work? I mean, how does Lucy stay upright? I did a little research on that, and there is a tiny little gyroscope in the iPad and in the smartphones as well, of course, that will make sure that whenever the image goes one way or the other, it will always flip back to the correct position. That's because this gyroscope measures the direction according to, I think, the left-right axis and the up-down axis and the front-back axis, whatever, and somehow it keeps it straight. It's a self-correcting mechanism. And I cannot think of a better example or an image or metaphor, if you want to call it that, of what Jesus is going to share with us today in his words from Matthew's Gospel. He is going to give us a relationship correcting mechanism. We're going to call it gyroscopic grace. A way that when a relationship gets out of whack, doing what Jesus tells us to do will bring it back into whack, to use a scientific term. I don't want to get too fancy. That's the way gyroscopic grace will work. So I want to tell you first, before we get into the mechanism that Jesus is going to give us for our relationships, I want to get into the theory of it. The theory of the gyroscope is that it follows Newton's first law of motion. Now, I know we all know that, but I'll just tell it to you anyway. It says that when an object is in motion, it will maintain a constant velocity unless acted upon by an unequal, unbalanced force. I have no idea what that means, but it's how a gyroscope works. I better understand the theory behind the principle that Jesus is going to give us. The theory is this: we are all messed up. Period. You are. You, yes, you. I'm pointing to yes, you. You. And me. Every one of us is messed up. Every one of us sees things according to a skewed perspective, according to our personalities, according to values that somehow we have, according to repressed emotions that are sunk into our subconscious that comes out in different bad ways, perhaps, come out in different bad ways. I don't know. But we all say and do things we're not aware of doing or saying that could hurt. We don't know. We might intend them one way and they're taken another. And we mess up relationships. We mess them all up. We mess up relationships with our significant others, with our children, with our siblings, with our classmates, with our bosses, with our co-workers, with our members here, between members and staff, between staff. We're all messed up. That is what Jesus' theory is. And consequently, he gives us now a perspective on how to, when we mess up relationships, which we do, how to automatically get those relationships back into whack. So Joey's going to read the scripture, his lesson, to us, and remember that these words that he speaks, Jesus is speaking originally to the disciples. He is trying to train them to be shepherds for the flock of the early church. He knows, people being messy as we are, that they're going to have to, the disciples will have to shepherd them according to a very strict guideline. And by the way, Matthew, who has recorded this years afterward, is living in the messiness of the relationships of the early church. So Matthew has to be smiling as he writes this, saying, yep, Jesus knows what he's talking about. In honor of the Master's gyroscopic grace, would you please stand?
If your brother or sister sins against you, go and correct them when you are alone together. If they listen to you, then you've won over your brother or sister. But if they won't listen, take with you one or two others, so that every word may be established by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. But if they still won't pay attention, report it to the church. If they won't pay attention even to the church, treat them as you would a Gentile and tax collector. I assure you that whatever you fasten on earth will be fastened in heaven, and whatever you loosen on earth will be loosened in heaven. Again, I assure you that if 2 of you agree on earth about anything you ask, then my Father who is in heaven will do it for you. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I'm there with them. Then Peter said to Jesus, Lord, how many times should I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Should I forgive as many as 7 times? Jesus said, not just 7 times, but rather as many as 77 times.
This is when we gasp. 77 times? Thinking of that, you may be seated. The way to put relationships back into whack is simple. You go straight to one another, to the person who has offended you. If a sister or brother has offended you, you go to that person. Do you know how many of us don't do that? And if we're all honest, we'd all raise our hands. It's hard to do what Jesus just said. It's like you are person A, and person B you have a beef with. You know that if you go to person B, that's a risky thing to do. You don't know how they will respond. Worse yet, that person might, in being honest with you, tell you about some things that you did that you don't want to know about, or things you said that you don't want to take responsibility for. So it's scary to do what Jesus said. It is much more fun not to go to person B, but to go to other people, persons C, D, and E, and tell them how tacky person B is. Or you go to person P, as in pastor. And in the years of my ministry, it's a theme. Every so often, a lay person or a staff person will come to my office and we'll talk about person B. Why? It feels good to talk about person B. And also, they want the pastor, person P, to do something about person B. And my response, except in extreme circumstances, is no. Because Jesus didn't say, go to your pastor and let him or her take care of it. Jesus said, you go to the person. Because let's face it, if I or any pastor really did that, you just triangulated the person, that pastor. Well, person B, yeah, I heard that you did such. Well, who told you? I can't say. And you're toast. It's damaging. Jesus was so wise. You go to from person A to person B. And while you're at it, you do not get on social media and tweet or post things about person B to get 100 of your best friends and followers to agree. Because whenever you post anything, it's going to make you look really good, the victim, and person B really bad, the evildoer. And Jesus says, to correct the relationship, do not play that game. You go straight to person B. And you know why Jesus said that? It's because of another theory, the theory that really grace is about something beautiful and powerful. It is the most amazing, it is that which gives the Christian life power and beauty and depth and enjoyment. I love it. Did you catch in the text how Peter has listened to what Jesus said, but he got hung up with the very beginning. He got hung up when Jesus said, go to the person who offended you and reconcile. He didn't hear all the rest about binding in heaven and that. He just heard, go to the person who offended you. And he waited for Jesus to finish before he raised a little hand and he said, Master, could I have a word? Yes, Peter. You know that thing about forgiving? How many times do we have to keep going back to that person? 7 times? 7's a nice round number. It's the complete number, like 7 days of creation. 7? And Jesus, smiling and twinkling in his eye because old brother Peter, every person, he speaks for us all, got hung up and he said, Peter, how many times do you go? Not 7 times, but 77 times. And another manuscript of that verse in Matthew calls it 7 times 70, or 490 times you keep going back trying to reconcile with the person. What? And Peter's eyes bulge and his jaw drops. But that's the truth, and that's the beauty. Because you know what Jesus was getting at? He was getting at this, that when you go to that person for reconciliation and all, it's not just about the relationship. It's about who you are. It's about transforming you, and that is the power of grace. The power and beauty of grace is that it transforms you. It transforms you. It makes you a different person. Think about it. When you go to that person who you have a beef with and you attempt reconciliation, when you did this is how I felt, this is what happened, let's talk about it. The very act of doing that, there's no more right and wrong, black and white. There are 2 equal people on the same plane. A flawed person talking to another flawed person, sharing their feelings and their hurts and their hopes. A person flawed but full of promise, meeting another person flawed and full of promise on the same playing field, seeking reconciliation. That is what the Christian life's all about, folks. That is why it grew from a few thousand in the mid-1st century to 5 to 6 million by the 3rd century. People experience that gyroscopic grace that can suddenly abolish the differences we have, can abolish Republican and Democrat, straight and gay, black and white, rich and poor, uneducated and educated. Abolishes that because this puts us all as flawed people seeking reconciliation through the grace of Jesus Christ. We are transformed as we seek to going and finding reconciliation with the offending brother or sister. I've shared this story with you a few years ago, but I think it bears repeating here as we move toward an end of this sermon. A few years ago when I was in college, I remember it like it was a few decades ago. I was a religion major at Central Methodist College, Fayette, Missouri, population 2,548. Salute. I was literally fresh off the farm from Poplar Bluff, and I was, a self-righteous religion major. Another religion major was not from Poplar Bluff. He was from Sin City, Chicago. And I'm just kidding if you're viewing from Chicago. But for a farm boy, that was Sin City, I'll tell you what. And just as I was this evangelical conservative, he was this profane liberal. And he was profane as I was pious. And we did not like each other. And we made sure everyone knew we did not like each other. We would have barbs at each other with classes and insults and so forth. I didn't like him. He didn't like me. And that's the way it was going to stay. Until I read one evening in my dorm room the words that Joy read to you. If a brother or sister offends you, you go and straighten it out with that person. And I said to Jesus that evening in prayer, I said to Jesus this: I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And you know what Jesus said to me? Did I stutter? No. Whoever said being a Christian's easy? You know, like baseball, if everyone could play, it'd be easy, so everyone would play. No. Being a Christian is tough because it means that you are told by the master to go and reconcile with someone who's been tacky with you. And I tried to find other excuses. I couldn't, so I called John from Chicago. I called him and I said, John, we're both stuck in Fayette over this Easter weekend coming up. I was wondering if you would like to go out and have a Coke. I will always remember the stunned silence that ensued. And then he got back on the line with his Chicago accent. We talk through half your mouth. Oh, yeah, Greg, that's okay. I'll tell you what, why don't you come over to the apartment? I'll have my wife cook us up some spaghetti. Would you like that? Sure. So I went. We had dinner. I discovered what it was like growing up in Chicago. He discovered what it was like growing up in the metropolis of Poplar Bluff on the farm. We simply got to know each other. Did we like each other? Not necessarily, but we sort of appreciated each other and respected each other. We were even religion majors, and we did have this guy named Jesus in common. Come Tuesday, we were in church history class. Did we trade barbs? Did we trade insults? Of course we did. But we didn't do it with such fervor, and it was sort of with a little smile and a smirk now, because we understood each other. And that felt, in just a small way, the magic of what Jesus told us to do in writing a relationship. John from Chicago died of leukemia a few years ago. So somehow in live streaming, if you hear it, John, thank you for the chance to put into action what Jesus told me and you to do. That was many years ago. I've grown older. I've grown wiser. I've come up with many excellent excuses not to do what Jesus has told me to do, not to make another phone call like I did. I can come up with all sorts of excuses now. But I also know I need to work on it. And thank God, literally, you have an opportunity to do that.